Hi, I'm Emily from the Pencil Room Online and welcome to this first class in a series of Learn to Draw classes. At the beginning of this year, I put out a poll on the YouTube Communities tab just to sort of get an idea of what people wanted from this channel. And the overwhelming response was that people wanted a Learn to Draw course. Now, I do have a Learn to Draw course for purchase, but I don't have anything on YouTube where people can start in one place and then move through a series of classes. And I've had that question asked a few times, where do I start with your videos? So I thought this would be a good way to provide some structure and also provide you what you want, which is Learn to Draw classes for beginners. The classes will be suitable for adults, but anyone from, say, 11 or 12 years old should be able to cope with what we're going to be talking about. So if you've got a child in your family who wants to draw along with you, then this could be a good way for both of you to practice. I'll just quickly go over how this series is going to work. I teach drawing and painting for a living, and what I find really works for people is if they have some kind of introduction to a concept or a skill, and then they have something to practice. So that's what we're going to do. We'll start with some exercises that you can do along with me, and then I'll have a little assignment that you can do in your own time so you can practice. This very first class is just about using your pencil and just becoming confident with making some marks. So we're not going to be drawing anything specific, but even if you've done drawing before, this is a really good way to warm up before you go into some more serious drawings. Now, it would be a really good idea to have a sketchbook because then you can keep everything together, and you might want to write some notes as you go along, and I'll let you know when you might like to do that and how you might like to do that, how you can use them. And you're going to need a pencil, just an HB pencil. I'm going to be using something a little bit darker just so you can see it on the video. Pencil and an eraser of some kind. We may not need to use this, hopefully we won't, but it's just there just as a safety if you want it. To start with, we're just going to be simply making some lines, and we're going to start from the left and move towards the right, just because that's the way people are used to writing. Being left-handed, I actually prefer to start from the right and move across. You can do it whichever way you like, but just for the sake of normalcy, I guess, we'll start from the left and we'll move to the right, and we're just going to start making some lines. Straight lines going down. And what I want you to do is just notice how your hand is working. So you're holding your pencil the same way you'd hold it when you're writing anything. And you should feel that your fingers are moving. Maybe you're getting a little bit of movement from the wrist as well. And then I want you to see if you can make these lines moving from the elbow instead. So what that means is your whole hand is moving like this. You're not just moving your wrist, but your whole hand is moving down the page. And if you haven't done any drawing before, then this is probably going to feel quite strange. You might need to go a little bit quicker to get a straight line. If you go slowly, sometimes you get a few wobbles. So there will be times where using our wrist is appropriate, and there will be times where working from our elbow is more appropriate. Generally, this gives you a lot more freedom of movement because you can make bigger marks. You're not confined to just the small radius here that your wrist can create. So we're just going to go over some different types of lines. We've drawn some straight lines here, and these are also parallel lines, and we're going to draw some more parallel lines now. We're going to draw them on different angles. You're drawing one line and then drawing another, and we're just going to start just using our wrist. So your wrist or your fingers, hands not moving this time. Parallel lines are lines that have an even space between them all the way from one end to the other. And you could even try changing the direction. So if your natural direction is to come down, maybe try going up, see what that feels like. So these ones are done with our wrist. Now we're going to have a go at doing some with our elbow, or moving our hand across the page so you feel like the movement is coming from your elbow rather than your wrist. The wrist stays fairly neutral and straight. A little bit more of a swifter movement. You see my hand is moving across the page. You can go the opposite direction. Don't worry if they're a little bit crooked. There'll be some direction that feels a lot more natural for you. This direction is not natural for me. You can see the result, whereas this direction is a lot more natural for me. So this is from our elbow. And now we're going to get into a rhythm and start working quite quickly. So we're going to do straight up and down lines, and we're going to go from the wrist 4 times and then from the elbow 4 times, just across the page. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then as we go across, see if you can get them more and more uniform, so even amount of space between each one. And there's no sort of right way or final result that is best. It's just about creating a pattern of movement and coordinating your hand. So we're trying out different ways of using our hand from the wrist. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then from the elbow. 1, 2, 3, 4. And hopefully by the time you've got to the end, you're feeling a little bit more confident with making those straight lines. You might find that you're moving a little bit faster and more freely. And now we're going to do just some intersecting lines. So these are parallel lines. These are also parallel lines. Now we're going to do some perpendicular lines. So perpendicular lines are lines that cross over each other at the centre. So we're going to go vertical and then horizontal. It doesn't matter which way you go. I mean, you might prefer to go up and from left to right, or you might prefer to go down and from right to left. And we're just using our wrist. So try and find the way that feels most natural to you. If you're doing quite small ones like I am, I'm running out of room, then you might be using more your fingers than your wrist, and that's okay. And then we're going to do some where we're moving our hand, or moving from the elbow. I'm running out of page here to lean on, which makes it a little bit awkward. You can turn your page around if you need to. 1, 2, 1. So 4 like that, and then again 4 using your fingers or your wrist. And then 4 using a movement from your elbow. And then I just want you to have a look at these and make some observations. And this is where you might be writing notes. It's a really good way to identify what you personally might need to practice on. So I know that this direction, I remember it was going up this way, that this is difficult for me, so I could just write not natural, or something that is making some kind of observation. We can also make observations about the way things look, so you might find that some of the movements that you're making were a lot sharper than others. Maybe that was because your pencil wasn't blunt yet, or maybe it's because when you use your fingers or your wrist, you're holding your pencil more upright than when you're using the elbow movement. And it's not about making a judgment of whether it's good or bad, and that's something that as we go through this series you're going to have to manage and deal with, because there's always going to be something that you feel like you could do better, especially if it's something that you're doing for the first time. It's going to go wrong, and you have to push through that and keep working. So try not to make this personal, any of this, even today when we're just playing around. So you could even just write down what feels good or what feels awkward. So for me, the moving from the elbow feels more natural and free. And if you find that, moving from the elbow, because you haven't done much drawing before, if you find that's difficult for you, then that's something to note down as well, because it's something that you can then work on later on. So these are all straight lines. We're going to move on to some curvy lines, and then I'm going to give you an assignment just to practice these different types of marks, and it'll be something a little bit fun. So we're going to do some wavy lines, and again we're going to move from left to right. If you are left-handed, you might prefer to move from right to left. It doesn't matter which way you go, just go with whatever's most natural for you. So we're just going to do a wavy line like this, But what I want you to do is start off just using your wrist and your fingers, and you'll find that eventually you have to move your hand. You can go a little bit slower if you need to. So this one here was just using your wrist. Let's do that again. You see you get to a point where you can't reach any further and you have to move your hand across. And then this time we're going to try and do it with our hand constantly moving. So the movement comes from the elbow, hand is still resting on the page, on the paper, but as you draw it's moving along. So we shouldn't have to stop. But you might find also that you don't have as much control when you're drawing this way. So we're going to start one side and we're not going to stop, we're just going to keep going. You might find your hand is resting on the page, or you might find this little finger here is resting on the page. Let's do another one like that. Nice free movement. I'm already making some observations. I can see that the start of my lines are kind of wonky, and I know that's just because I don't have anything to press on when I start at this side. You might find that when you come over this side they get a bit wonky because you're losing the surface to hold your hand steady. Okay, now we're going to do some pinwheels. If you've done my drawing exercises for beginners, some of these might be familiar, but we are again going to focus on whether we're using the wrist or whether we're using the elbow. So we're going to start really small in the centre and we're just going to move around, trying to keep an even distance as we go around each circle, but don't worry if it changes. And then once you start to go bigger, you'll find that you have to use your elbow. You have to move your hand. Go whichever direction feels most comfortable for you. So I'm using my fingers and my wrist, and then as I get to about here it starts to become awkward and I need to move my hand. And I also lose a little bit of control then as well. Try and get a rhythm going. If you want to, you can try the opposite direction, but don't make it any harder for yourself if you're already feeling like this is a bit of a challenge. You could write down what we've done here. So these were wrist, these were elbow, and then these are wrist to elbow. Okay, we've just got one more type of line that we're going to do, and then we're going to move on to a little project that you can experiment with these lines and do some practice. So obviously practice is the key to learning anything, and drawing is no exception. So we're just going to come across similar to the way we did these curvy ones, but we're going to do straight lines, so like triangle type lines, zigzags is the word I'm looking for. So we're going to use our wrist to start with. Now I've been using my hand like this. Maybe if I had changed my hand this way, it's going to be a little bit easier. Might be a little bit harder for you to see if I have my hand up there. So just going up, down, up, down, up, down. But what I'm saying is use your hand however works best for you. If you need to turn your page around, then do that. If you need to have your hand up here, then do that. If it's better to have it down here, if it's better to down here, have it over here, you don't have to follow exactly the way I'm using my hand. But do just focus on using your wrist for this line, or your fingers. So you see I have to move my hand across once I get as far as I can reach. And then again, like we did up here, we're going to do the same thing, but this time we're going to try and move our hand. And I might actually turn my page around so I've got a bit more surface here to work on. I was running out of room there. So we're going to go across, but we're also going to keep our hand moving the whole time. And again, you can write down what we've done and start to make some observations. So it might even be just looking at this and saying, this is wonky. So I can see that every time I go down this way, it's a little bit wonky. It's much straighter going up that way, and it's just my natural direction. This here is nice and even, so I could write that nice and even. Remember, it's not a judgment that you're making, it's figuring out how your hand works best at the moment, and also figuring out what you need to improve on, or what you might want to improve on if you want to be able to create a greater range of movement. We're just about through this lesson. What I'm going to leave you with is a project to do, and that is to just use some of those lines to create an abstract pattern. And if you've done Zentangle before, it's very similar to that. So we're going to be using straight lines and curvy lines. We can use the pinwheels, and we can also use the zigzag lines as well. So you're going to start off just by choosing some of those lines to start with. So there's a wavy line, curved line, and then I might decide to do a straight line, thinking about how you're moving as you do this, and then I could do a zigzag line, another straight line, I might do another straight line up here, and you're just going to play around and use your imagination to create some larger shapes to start with, and then we're going to fill those in. You can see as you do larger shapes, you're going to have to move from the elbow. When we move on to the next lesson, we're going to be doing some sketching, which is quite different. We'll be using short lines like this to sort of mould things. But at the moment, I really want you to just have a go at doing things freehand. If you make a mistake, it doesn't matter. I mean, if I do something like this and it's supposed to be a nice even curvy line and I get all these wobbles in it, that's okay. I mean, it's sort of part of the abstractness of this assignment. So I might do another one here. And then you're going to start filling these in. So it might be that you do some little pinwheels. You can fill in the whole thing. I won't do all of this, I'll just do little pieces, and then you can work in your own time. You could put some straight lines in. You could even bring in some shading if you want to. But when I say shading, I mean using straight lines. So this is a really good practice to get that nice even movement, whether you're working from your wrist or whether you're working from the elbow. So it's not shading with my pencil, but it's creating a shaded area. We could do some intersecting lines. And again, if you want to shade any of these in, think about using lines. Use this to practice some nice swift movements, really fast. Either using your fingers, flicking your fingers, or using your your elbow. The further apart you put these lines, the lighter it's going to appear as a tonal value, and the closer you put them together, the darker it's going to appear. So use this as just a practice. You don't have to do it now, you don't have to finish it now, but you could do it sometime during the next week or two, and also maybe go back through what we've done. And you could do these again as well, especially anywhere where you've noticed there might be a weakness. So these ones here I could definitely practice some more. I didn't make any notes there, but it's very even with the wrist. And then it gets uneven with elbow. So I could do some practice of those where I'm doing the wrist and then I'm really focusing on, can I get it a little bit more even with the elbow, or even practicing it just using the elbow movement. So I hope you enjoyed this lesson and found it useful. Next lesson we're going to go over sketching and just using basic shapes, and then we'll start moving into how to sketch objects in the following lesson. Now this course is really about learning how to draw from observation. Even if you're interested in animation or illustration, this will still be useful for you, but it is really aimed at people who want to be able to draw the things they see around them, and what's the process for that? What are the skills, the practical skills that you need to be able to draw what you see? So keep practicing, just drawing, doodling, getting that coordination going. And if you want to share what you're doing, I'm going to set up a post on my Facebook page for this video, and you could post images beneath that of how you're going. If you've got any questions, you can ask them below the video here. Make sure you subscribe so that you'll be notified when the next lesson comes out, and hopefully I'll see you back then. But feel free to do whatever you want with this drawing. So I'm starting to see some kind of creature emerging just because of the shape. This looks like the body. If you want to put some legs or something on here, do something kind of creative, then go for it.